First tonight, the Ukrainian capital Kyiv has come under heavy fire hours after President Volodymyr Zelensky ended a European tour in which he was promised billions of dollars worth of military aid. It's the 8th time the capital has come under attack this month. Officials described it as an intense and exceptional attack that was carried out by drones, cruise and ballistic missiles. They said 18 of them were shot down. Ukraine's military also said it had destroyed 6 Kinzhal hypersonic missiles, which are capable of reaching speeds of more than 11,000 kilometers an hour. Russia has claimed in the past that these could not be taken out by any of the world's air defense systems. Kyiv's mayor said falling debris was reported in 4 districts of the city and that at least 3 people had been injured.
We've heard it all. Even our windows shook. But thank God, there were no missiles in our area. I feel pain, fear, nervousness, restlessness. God, we are waiting for victory, and when all this is over.
All my friends and classmates have heard it. They were very worried. One of the rockets that was shot down fell near my classmate's house. I think it is very bad.
Meanwhile, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa says 6 African countries will send a peace mission to Ukraine and Russia as soon as possible. Speaking in Cape Town while hosting Singapore's Prime Minister, he said these countries would include Senegal, Uganda and Egypt, as well as South Africa. He added that Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin have agreed to the meetings. The announcement comes a day after Mr. Ramaphosa said that South Africa had been under extraordinary pressure to pick sides in the conflict.
The 2 leaders that I had occasion to speak to, that is President Putin and President Zelensky, agreed that they would be willing to receive a mission of the African heads of states in both Moscow and Kyiv. I agreed with both of them that we would commence with the preparations for the engagements with these African heads of state. My discussions with the 2 leaders demonstrated that they are both ready to receive the African leaders and to have a discussion on how this conflict can be brought to an end. Whether that will succeed or not is going to depend on the discussions that will be held.
Well, for more on the war in Ukraine, let's bring in Arise special correspondent Karl Bostic, who's been monitoring developments from our London studio. Good to see you, Karl. Let's start with that heavy bombardment by Russia overnight, targeting the Ukrainian capital Kyiv, an attack that's been described as exceptional in its density. Looking at the evidence, what can we say for certain about those 18 missiles fired that the Ukrainians said they shot down?
Charles, it's fascinating because what we're now understanding is this. According to Ukrainian officials and also defense analysts in the U.S., this was a very, very complex multi-layered operation carried out by Russia. You had missiles coming in from all directions. They were fired by land. Those are the Iskander ballistic missiles. They were fired by sea. Those are the cruise missiles, and they were fired from the air. Those are the hypersonic missiles. And they were all coming at Kyiv, different directions, in a very short amount of time, Charles. This all happened before 3 a.m., while the residents of Kyiv were in their sleep, and it lasted only about 20 minutes. And the thing is, Charles, all 18, according to Ukrainian officials, all 18 of those missiles were shot down, intercepted in large part because of Ukraine now receiving those 2 badly needed Patriot systems, which are capable of shooting down hypersonic missiles, which Russia has. Until then, Ukraine was unable to defend itself against those missiles. As you mentioned, Charles, those hypersonic missiles, so-called because they travel faster than the speed of sound, Charles, 5 times the speed of sound, more than a mile a second, and all 6 of those were intercepted. You had the 9 cruise missiles, also the caliber cruise missiles fired from the naval ships in the Black Sea Fleet off the coast of Crimea. Those are intercepted and shot down. And then finally, you had the land-based Iskander missiles. Again, what this shows is this, among many things, it was a test of Ukraine's air defense system because that was considered to be one of the weak points or vulnerabilities of Ukraine's military. But not only was it a test of it, it was also, yet again, another attempt, Charles, as you mentioned, the 8th barrage, to soften up, to weaken, if not deplete, Ukraine's air defense system in anticipation of a long-awaited counteroffensive so that Ukraine would not have as much to rely on. At the same time, Charles, this was exposing Ukraine's badly needed goals of attaining aviation fighting power. In other words, that translates to fighter jets. It wants F-16 fighter jets, which so far have been rebuffed, and it wants longer range artillery, Charles. But that was one of the fruits of President Zelensky's trip to Europe, Charles, when he visited Italy, Germany, France, and then finally the UK, out of which was promised another air defense system, actually about a dozen from Germany, and long-range missiles from the UK, Charles, which can travel 155 miles or so to defeat these things. So this is, no matter how you look at it, this is an escalation of sorts.
And briefly, Karl, we've had some reaction from Moscow. Not only did they say that they hit all the targets they wanted to hit, but the Russian Defense Ministry is claiming that it successfully hit one of those air defense systems, the US-made Patriots. And I wonder if that's been confirmed.
Well, that's only what the Russian Ministry of Defense is saying, Charles. Ukraine has only received 2 Patriot defense systems. They only received them in April. So it's only been really a month since they arrived, Charles. And they're very, very expensive and very, very complex. They're worth more than $1 billion, Charles. And training was very, very complicated, Charles, because for each Patriot battery, which can shoot down planes, missiles, and other sorts of artillery shells, it takes up to 90 to 100 military personnel to operate each battery. But so far, Ukraine has not responded to this nor confirmed it, and perhaps the next test is when is the next barrage and whether or not those hypersonic missiles will be intercepted once more.
Meanwhile, Karl, the longer-term project is to try and bring an end to the conflict. We've heard from President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa saying that Africa has offered to mediate. What more can you tell us about this, and what, if anything, can the Africans bring to this mission of peace?
It's actually very, very fascinating, Charles, because as you saw from hearing that clip from President Ramaphosa speaking, he had weekend phone conversations separately with Russia's Vladimir Putin and with Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky on Friday and Saturday. This also comes in the wake of a real problem and trouble for Ramaphosa after the U.S. accused South Africa of allowing a freighter to be loaded with weapons and ammunition for Russia, despite South Africa proclaiming neutrality and non-alignment. And so in that phone call with Zelensky, there also came a warning. Anyone siding with an aggressor, there will be consequences. And President Zelensky was simply saying that we have a formula that needs to be followed. And I think that's really kind of what triggered and sparked this initiative to have 6 African leaders, which would be unprecedented, Charles, from the countries that you mentioned. But to put things in further context is this, Charles. You know, when the war started last February, the initial UN resolution condemning it, 17 African countries abstained from voting to condemn Russia for it. And since then, South Africa has very stubbornly clung to that non-alignment, and it's a very complicated relationship, Charles. Russia being the biggest supplier of wheat arms to the African continent. At the same time, you have African countries now saying the Cold War is over. We don't want another breeding ground for the Cold War, and we want to be treated as partners. So that's maybe part of the impetus for this trip that needs to be seen. But to give you one final idea, Charles, about what all this means is that, until just recently, Africa was not on the radar screen for Ukraine. You had the foreign minister, Zuleba, visiting Africa for the first time in October, months into the war. He visited Senegal, and his first reaction, he was surprised, was that as far as the Senegalese is concerned, Ukraine and Russia are one people. Who started the war? Who was the aggressor? When they had that UN vote last March, Charles, you had the Tanzanian president saying, we don't understand what they're fighting over, what the fuss is all about. Similarly, you also had a situation where people in that Kuleba visit felt that actually Ukraine was also partly to blame because of this worsening food crisis brought on by the fact that grains and wheat could not be shipped from Russia and Moscow. They were blaming equally Ukraine. So that last question is this, Charles. When this delegation does arrive in Kyiv and Moscow respectively, what kind of Africa will we see? Will they be buying into the Russian narrative that it's because of the sanctions by the West that Africans are suffering, or do they really want to come up with a peace plan, which is right now being viewed with cautiousness by both the US, the UK, as well as the UN?
Thank you, Karl. Karl Bostic in London.